Now, in this lesson, we want to talk about pattern. Seeing pattern to do two things. One is directs the eye throughout the composition, but it also, pattern helps simplify shapes. When we look for patterns of light and dark or patterns of color, it can really help simplify seeing things in terms of shape, pattern, mass, instead of detail, or even instead of what it actually is. Seeing the pattern of snow, light snow against the darker water, helps me draw and get the values better than if I look at the photograph too closely and start seeing all the colors in the water, details in the snow. It keeps me from being too literal. If I know I need to find pattern to simplify, it helps me to reduce things to what's important and not worry about detail. This is a painting by Aldro Hibbard. And snow subjects have a lot of pattern because the snow is so light that you can have pattern of snow or pattern of rocks against the snow, pattern of houses as they go back, trees, whatever. So the snow, wintertime, you really see a lot of strong pattern. And here the pattern of the snow against the darker water, pattern of the trees as they go back into the distance. Also, the pattern of the snow as it starts in the foreground, moves through here, and comes up in the hills, and then back down again and kind of moves around. So he's using pattern to move the eye around, but also to make things simple. Too often when we think of pattern to lead the eye in, we're still thinking, in this case, snow or grass or water. We can create patterns, but still be tied to detail and try to be too literal. So when you want to, or when you think in terms of pattern, think of it so that you're not being so literal, that you're simplifying more, seeing things more abstractly than detail or trying to be too literal. So I think that is a really big purpose, is to not to be as literal as the camera. We want to see our subject a lot different than the camera by simplifying, finding shape and pattern to lead the eye and to make it more simple. And then interpret color and value also to create that dark and light pattern and the suggestion of light. So really get away from the idea of painting as a way to copy photograph. This is another Aldro Hibbard. He was an early to mid 20th century painter on the East Coast. Really good. And painted outside a lot, even in the winter. We always saw pictures of him painting in deep snow. And when you paint outside or paint from life, whether it's still life or landscape or figure, it's a lot easier to learn to see things in terms of pattern because you can't be literal when you're painting from life. The photograph, it's kind of flattened already for us. It already has the boundaries, and it's so easy just to copy it. But really go through the process of thinking about pattern to simplify what we're looking at. You can see the pattern of the water, and all this is set against the light snow. Pattern of the water leads to the pattern of the rocks, and it just kind of winds around and leads you through the picture, but it also, again, simplifies. Instead of seeing 150 rocks here, he sees a pattern of rocks, and he uses that pattern to simplify plus to lead the eye around. Few more. And all these paintings, they're more simplified than reality, and I think that's the point of painting. This is a E. Martin Hennings. He was a Taos painter, early 20th century. And the pattern of shadow here, of course, we've talked about the shadow pattern, but this helps, of course, lead the eye in and up and around and, down again. You can travel around a bunch of different areas here in this painting, so you can kind of go all over the place. It leads you into the painting, but it also helps simplify the shape. Now this little canyon becomes a light shape or a dark shape. It really reduces everything. Now after that, you can get some subtle variations. So he's got three main values here. He's got the one dark, overall dark, the overall light, and then he's got a highlight where the light catches the hills there in just the right spot to show form. So it goes light and then gets a little darker as it winds around, or a little darker as it goes that way. And then it has the basic shadow. So those three values. Now he came back and added little bits of color change and some darker accents in the shadow and some detail in the light. But what makes it work is that simple pattern of dark and light here that simplifies that cliff. Same thing with the light green trees against the dark mountains. You know, no detail there to speak of at all, but just has a simple shape in there. He does keep the trees somewhat the same height. I have no idea why. My guess is it simplifies things if he were to vary the shapes too much in here, that he would draw too much attention to the background. And he does have some variation in there, but that's the first thing I thought of when I looked up here and saw the trees, is that they're all the same height, and I'm always wanting to stagger shape and size and distance between things. But still works really nicely. Also, pattern of shape of the shrubbery here. Kind of leads up in here and comes up into this shrubbery. So everything, reduce it to pattern. Then you can use fewer values to break it up. Because even in the green here, he's got this overall light, few dark accents, and some subtle color change. There's not much to that shrubbery. He kept it really simple. Now this is a Frank Tenney Johnson painting, and here he's got his focal point way over to the side, close to the edge here, which you usually don't see very often. But this works because of the pattern of the rocks. These rocks are dark, but they're not as dark as the trees. So the trees are another pattern. But this leads the eye around up in here to the darker trees and into the lights and so on, so that he can put his focal point way over here on the side, because your eye is going to follow this line. And then the guy on the horse is pointed in, so it's going to follow in here and wind around. So it works, but he has to think through this strong angle, this strong line of the rocks, plus the pattern of the rocks as it goes in here. He's got a lot of dark in here, but different values of dark. So the trees become one pattern, the lighter shadow of the rocks become another pattern, then the darker reflection and the lighter rocks with a few dark shapes in there. Very, very abstract, pattern-oriented painting. And the pattern, again, does two things. It helps you simplify the rocks. I imagine he blocked in this whole area with this color, then broke it up with the dirt, a few shrubbery, dark accents, and some lights. So seeing large pattern first, and then uses that pattern, set it up so that your eye follows the pattern in that way. It's a really nice painting, mainly because of the composition, and it's just so simplified. It's so simple compared to other paintings that are more detailed. Here's another E. Martin Hennings, the Taos artist. Frank Tenney Johnson, by the way, was in 30s, 40s. I think he died in the 50s. He was only 53, so he did a lot of painting real well, real fast. This is E. Martin Hennings, again, Taos painter. And again, the pattern here, and you can really see pattern real strong with snow. But the pattern of the shrubbery, winding around in here with the focal point, the two figures being the focal point. This is probably the main focal point, secondary focal point. But the pattern really leads to the pattern of the snow, dark and light, and then the pattern of the bushes. And that's offset by how simple the mountains are. There's actually probably two values there. I haven't seen this one in person, would like to. I think it's in New Mexico. But really simple, dark mountains allows him to do a bit more detail in the shrubbery. There's a lot of detail in here. But he wouldn't be able to do that if he had too many value changes in the mountains. It'd become too busy. And the clouds are fairly simple dark and light for the clouds, and one value for the blue, and just breaks it up. And again, that creates a pattern of blue that isn't accidental. Heavier on this side, not quite as heavy on that side, and balanced by the blue. But real strong patterns here that help simplify the shrubbery. If he can block it all in this value, the shrubbery, chop in a few areas of dark and light snow, then just adding another 2 or 3 values to the shrubbery is all he needs to do. So it's a lot less detail here than it looks. If we look at some photographs, a pattern is very helpful when you have, if you're painting more midday or maybe a cloudy day, because the pattern will help simplify shape, but also lead the viewer's eye around a lot more. And this is one of those photographs taken more midday in the Bighorn Mountains. Has a nice lead into this real dark creek to the dark trees. A little bit too centered. We'd want to recompose a little bit. Decide, I'm going to have a little more on the right side than on the left. So I will cut off a little bit here. And I could do this a bunch of different ways. I could put more on the left than the right. You just have to pick. But I want those trees off center. So I have more on the right side. Now the trees are off center. And I can think in terms of creating pattern here. Now I've got the pattern of the water, the tree back in here. I've got pattern of the trees back in the distance, but also a variety of grass that I can run with a little bit. I've got a greener grass in here, a little bit more lighter yellow-green here, a little darker orange back in there. So I can set up shapes that will help simplify the flat plane as well as kind of pull the eye around a bit more. I also have the pattern of this lighter blue-green bushes in there, shrubbery. So I've got a variety of colors in the grass I can push. Of course, a real strong pattern of fields back in here in the distance that I can use. But again, also the dark and light of the hillside and the trees. So I can rearrange those to create patterns that lead the eye around a bit more. So I did that here on this next one. And the strong pattern is still the water. I've got the smaller trees starting here, kind of going up to the bushes here, the trees there, and then it winds around up in here and back. So I'm looking for patterns and shapes that kind of flow, that the eye can kind of follow. It doesn't have to be real obvious, but your eye does, follow along in here and wind around. Also, just follow the water in and wind around up in here and then back in that way. So thinking about those patterns, but it also helps simplify. I can pick out a couple of the colors in the grass. Got the orange dirt, kind of an orange grass, kind of a darker green, real light, pale yellow green. Same thing over here. You got real darker blue-green fields back in here and the white, really light field back in the distance. So a lot of color there to pick from. I do not have to follow the photograph. I can just get ideas from the photograph. So because the lighting is somewhat flat, I'm really pushing the strong pattern of dark and light fields and variety of color. Real strong contrast between the trees, the light field, and the darker field. Real strong back in there. Not much contrast in the grass, but what I have here more is a variety of color as opposed to just strong value change. I could have created more a pattern of orange grass, flowing through here and the greener grass and then a grayer grass or something and created pattern there, but I didn't. I just chopped it up. I just wanted a variety and have the water to be the strong pattern and then the background fields and the background hills and trees to be the stronger pattern. But this does make it a lot stronger, separating shapes a lot more and creating patterns that make it easier to simplify and carry the eye around a little more. And this one also in the Bighorns, again, kind of midday, a little flat. So first thing I want to do is maybe get some contrast between the shrubbery and the grass, or just make a different grass. I don't really care what it is. I'm just looking for a pattern of a different color and value that's going to pull the eye through. It's going to follow up in here and wind around and go all over the place. Now I didn't crop yet. I should have done that because it does have too much in it. So I'm going to crop first. My focal point might be these aspens, so I want to cut off a little more on the right side and have a bit more on the left side. And I don't have to have all those trees showing. So now the aspens are just off center. So I'm creating a darker pattern of grass in the foreground compared to the lighter, and getting a little bit lighter, a little more contrast in the field there. When I have more contrast like that, it doesn't go as flat. I'm creating more contrast with those pattern of dark and light. Again, it doesn't matter if it's shrubbery or all grass or all shrubbery. I need pattern. And I should get this hill a little darker. I looked at this later and I had this too light because this is a slanted hill. Right here is slanted and then we got flat. A little bit of slanted here. So there should be a value change between those big shapes. And I didn't get that, but should be. And then there's some of the kind of dead grass. If we look at the photograph, there's some, well, I don't really see it too much now. Some in here, some of that violet, whether it's dirt, I don't really care what it is. It can be anything, but I'm just using it, again, to kind of pull the eye, create a pattern of a grayer color against the stronger orange hillside. Then also darkening those shadows on the hill over in here on the yellow field, getting the trees maybe a different color than the greens. There's so much green here, making those aspens. I should probably make these aspens yellow also. And aspens kind of go from a yellow to yellow-green, a yellow-orange. I usually don't have them all just yellow. They're always in different transitions, not all the same. And then just darkening the water. And then adding some violet into that dark. Now the dark I put into the water. In the photograph, we're seeing just the real shallow water, so the water's not real blue. It's more of the dirt underneath. So burnt sienna with a little orange and blue. So it's kind of a warm gray, only a bit more orange in it. Not just a gray, but a grayish kind of red-orange. And then scrubbing a little blue-violet on top. Because some of the sky does reflect in that shallow water, just not as much as in deeper water. And then some dark accents. Those dark accents in the shrub will really help set that off. And I did come back and darken that hill. But you can see there's a lot more pattern in here now, starting with the yellow grass winding around, or the darker green shrubbery pulling your eye in. A lot of different ways of simplifying, and in this case, creating more interest as well, because it is kind of flat and boring. And I always do these small first, painting-wise, because I am changing quite a bit. I'm taking the basic foundation that's there and creating a bit more pattern of dark and light contrast and changing some color. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 or 4, and they can be just on scraps of canvas I've laying around. I used to paint on matte board a lot. When I matted pastels, I would always use scrap matte board and just do these practice things on. Anymore, the canvas boards are so cheap, those cheap canvas boards. I always have hundreds of those laying around to do these smaller exercises with. This is a good example of so much detail and how pattern will simplify it. There is a lot of detail in the background. And the background detail does pull away from, or pull the eye away from the focal point a bit more. But what it also does, it kind of flattens. There's so many little darks and lights in here that it brings the mountain forward, almost on the same level as all the detail in the grass. So if I can simplify that background and create a pattern that makes it easier to read and makes the mountain stay back in the background, that's what I want to do. I did this all in one shot, so I didn't vary. But if we look at the background, simplifying these trees and then simplifying the hillside really makes the house stand out. And then I can actually add a ton of detail in the foreground because I don't have any detail anywhere else. But even though I'm adding a lot of detail, I'm simplifying it. I'm pulling some of these colors together to create patterns. I've got a pattern of the lighter green, winding up in here, this grayish green going this way, the darker shadowed green pulling you up. The pattern of the orange or the white flowers or yellow flowers. Those are all patterns that help simplify shapes and make the viewer's eye move through a little bit better. Really simplifying trees and background mountains to make the foreground stand out. If I get the trees more detailed and the mountains more detailed, I have to simplify the foreground. I can't add everything in there like I see it in the photo. I like the photo. There's something nice about it, even the detail in the background, but only because it's a photo. If it becomes a painting, it has to be simplified. So we don't want to be literal with interpretation. See patterns and shape, which will help simplify things a lot more. Okay, one more here. It's in Colorado, and compositionally I want to change it in that it's all the trees are a little bit too much on the left side. So my solution would be, if I wanted to keep this whole scene, would be to move the trees, or this tree here, move it over just a bit. And that would definitely balance it out. Or I could keep it trees as they are, because they are spaced apart fairly well, not too even. I could crop off some of the right side, and that's a little better balance. Not so much empty space on the right. But this one, even before I do anything to it, has nice pattern to it. The different colored grass is kind of winding around. I just have to connect them a little bit more. Or the snow here, I could use that snow more, patches of snow in there to wind around and pull the eye in and simplify all the just big chunks of value and color. First thing I do is the background. I got that simple mass of the dark evergreens in the background. And against that, you got the simple mass and shape of the bare aspen trees. And by pushing them and simplifying and creating a pattern of that darker background allows those trees to stand out more. And then the grass. I emphasized this darker grass in here, winding around into the trees. Same thing in here. It's kind of going that way in the pattern of snow. I could probably work with that snow a little more to wind around. But you don't have to be overly obvious. I think just a little bit of a flow, like this leading in the background. Even though it doesn't connect, this dark gray color pulls the eye in. You can be too literal with pattern too, and have too many definite shapes. It's better to have a shape kind of come and go instead of being a bit too literal. They become too literal on the computer because I'm really not softening the edges, but I would lose the edges a bit here, maybe some in here. And so it's, the shapes of the patterns don't become too obvious. But that works a little better than this. I'm just separating things and using those shapes to create patterns that help simplify and lead the eye.